ask Ms. Sanusha Naidu to give us a presentation. As she is getting her mic ready, I would just like to mention that Ms. Sanusha Naidu is a foreign policy analyst and currently a research fellow at the Institute for Global Dialogue based at UNISA in Pretoria. And she has a master in international relations from the United Kingdom University of Staffordshire. And she's previously worked at the Open Society Foundation for South Africa, as well as others. She has an extensive publications record, including 2 books on China and Africa. And then maybe the links for this can be shared later. She's also a regular media commentator on various national and international issues for major news agencies and channels ranging from Al Jazeera, Channel Africa, CBS Africa, and many others. And she's also a regular analyst on South Africa's domestic politics and electoral trends. So Ms. Sanusha Naidu, I just ask you to give your presentation. And if we can please try to stick to 5-6 minutes, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Paddy, and thank you to Renu, and this has been an incredible panel. So since I have limited time, I'm not going to go through all of the accolades, but just to say all protocol observed. I think it's been a very interesting discussion around how do we define a world post-corona or post-COVID. And let me start with this as a point of departure. I don't think we're ever going to get to a point of a post-corona or a post-COVID world. I do think that we are going to be engaging a lot in trying to find the kind of right mix or the right model that's going to address the structural and the systemic risks that the world has engaged as a result of whether it was a shock to the system or whether we've been warned about the impact or the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think in terms of cooperation, and I think it's important that we also define that cooperation is a very, very asymmetric word in the way that we are looking at it. It's a power-related relationship. Whether we talk about it through the North and South context, or whether we talk about it in the South-South context, or whether we talk about it in inter-regional spaces, because it does signify that there is a relationship in which there's a power hitter and there's a recipient who essentially has to define what the to use a very interesting Indian analogy of what the wicket wants, and a cricket analogy. So I think, to my mind, I would say that the point I want to take as a point of departure, as in addition, is the fact that we cannot be seeing cooperation as we saw it previously. Either we have to think that out of the box, or we have to think that there's no box, or we have to think that cooperation now has to be a zero-based engagement. And that zero-based engagement has to be defined or understood, not even conceptualized. I think academics and all of us are caught in a very difficult dilemma. We have to think about it as if we're starting from a point where everybody's equal. And if if COVID has equalized us in very dramatic and systematic ways that have been as a disruptor to the way we've seen the world from a neoliberal perspective, then we have to think beyond that. We have to think beyond the fact that cooperation cannot be defined in that way anymore. And I think I like the point that Palani made, and I don't want to belabor it, but I think the point that I want to accompany to what Palani was saying, and that is agency. I think African governments, the African Union, have an opportunity here to not just redefine agency, but to essentially recalibrate and calibrate agency to its own advantage. Whether it's through how you negotiate under the FOCAC agreement, how do you negotiate what has been the question of debt and the whole question of debt re-engagement and zero-based grants or loans or whatever. The problem here is that it cannot be from the same book that we've seen previously. And I think that's precisely the crisis that we are in now. One of my favorite quotes is from Antonio Gramsci, which says that the crisis precisely exists because the old is dying and the new cannot be born. And I think what we are suffering from is that COVID-19 not only represents a medical level of comorbidities that put people into ICUs and increase mortality rates, it has exacerbated the comorbidities of countries and their structural conditions that they've never really paid attention to. And that comes to the question of this debate between how do you address the migrants and what migrants give to your economy in terms of the informal, and how do you actually then say, well, I want to basically give only jobs to nationals because I'm looking only at South African nationals. And that's the big debate in South Africa. The big debate in South Africa over the fact that we had this rollout of a relief measure, etc., is that migrants were never treated, whether they're refugees, asylum seekers, economic migrants, etc., have always had a tussle with the state. And so this is going to be a critical dilemma, because if migrants actually are the engine of economies, particularly wherever they go, then it's going to be, how do we negotiate the space for them that brings them into the way in which cooperation is defined? And I think I have about 2 seconds to say that the challenge here is not necessarily about redoing what we've been doing always in the past and getting it wrong. Is that we are given the opportunity to do it all over again, but with a much more clearer consciousness and a clearer conscience around what matters most, and that's humanity. Thank you.
Clear and to the point. Is there a box? Very interesting. I think, Sanusha, we could have, that's a topic for another panel discussion that we could go on and on. Thank you for those insights.